Welcome to Navigate Now. This is the podcast where we explore everything around people and places. I'm your host, Jon Docksey, and I'm super excited to have Chris as our guest on this particular episode. We're going to explore everything around how places tell a story. Hi, Chris. Thanks for joining us today.
Great, no problem. Thanks for having me. So I'm a place manager. I started as a practitioner a long time ago, about approaching 30 years ago. And about 10 or so years ago, moved to become an advisor. So I've worked in over 120 UK locations, based in the Midlands, near Solihull. And I literally love the world of place management.
That's quite a few places you racked up over the years. Cool.
Sure.
Brilliant. So I always want to, in these conversations, just as we get started, I love to know a little bit about the person that we are learning from in this particular episode.
Yep.
So as we have this conversation, I always like to get to know the person behind the conversation, behind what we're learning about in this particular episode. So Chris, as a person, tell me something fun, interesting about Chris, and before we kick off in our conversation.
Okay, well, something a little bit different is I'm in my early 50s and I learnt to ski in my late 40s. So unlike many people that ski, probably most people that ski, I learnt very late. It was arguably a risk because obviously in your late 40s, you're a bit less flexible. You're a bit more prone to breaking if you do fall. It was a risky strategy, but I now love skiing and I go skiing every year and it's brilliant. So maybe I'm a bit of a risk taker.
Awesome. Love it. I mean, I would love to be able to ski. Never done it.
Well, do it. Never too late.
Never too late. There you go. There's a first takeaway of the episode. It's never too late. Love it.
Sure.
Brilliant. No, super looking forward to having this particular conversation today. I entitled the episode, Every Place Tells a Story. Places with People and Purpose. So I think it's really important that we get a clear story about every place, and we'll unpick something around there about the changing face of place, about the planning for people, places and potential, and a little bit about how their storytelling then becomes part of place discovery and potentially a little bit of wayfinding as well, maybe along the road. So just maybe to kick us off, I want to explore how towns and cities have evolved and the impact that has had, how we experience them, how we navigate them, how we discover places within them. You've mentioned your work in place management and the 120 places you've been part of and more counting, I'm sure. How would you define place management to someone who's not familiar with that term?
So place management, and it's really important that we distinguish place management from kind of the more generic use of the word place, because there's lots of terms bandied around: place shaping, place changing, place making. Now, place management, importantly, brings together a group of interested parties, predominantly businesses, although also voluntary and community kind of representatives, but it brings together parties to improve generally a central place, so a core town or city centre, although not exclusively. So that's really place management. It's about garnering a community, predominantly businesses, around improving that place.
Cool. And across those 120, across those years of experience that you've had, I'm guessing obviously naturally through life been changes, and you mentioned it's not exclusively towns and cities. Have you worked in any other places that are not towns or cities, or see good impact in other types of places?
Sure. So reasonably often I've worked in places that are part of wider districts or boroughs or bigger areas, and been asked to look at the kind of landscape as an entire area and the places within it and the interconnections.
Brilliant.
So, but whilst most of my work has been in core town or city centres, sometimes there's the whole district or area-wide piece, and that's arguably as important to the local economy as the individual place. The interconnections between them, how they either compete with each other or complement each other.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, beyond their regional or sub-regional boundaries, how they interact. So place management doesn't tend to cover districts, although there are some exceptions to that. For example, there are business improvement districts such as North Notts, which cover a really wide area with multiple centres within it.
Yeah,
So
that's really important, that dynamic, because at Clara, we work with towns, cities, hospitals, all sorts of types of places. And it's really helpful, I think, having that perspective, as you said, not just in one area, but regions, because you can then take learnings from one and apply it to another. Do you see over the years place management changing, or the function and the character of UK towns? How would you see that have changed in the past 10, 15 years?
So, not so much within the past 10 or 15 years, although places have certainly changed. One of the fundamental changes in place management in the UK was about 20 years ago, and that was when BIDs, business improvement districts, were introduced.
Yeah.
Now, I can remember, and I operated in a time which was pre-UK BIDs. Mm-hmm. So they migrated across from North America, and we have bespoke legislation now to cover all 4 of the UK countries, although slightly frustratingly, the legislation is different for both England and Wales, which are grouped together, the BID legislation, for Scotland and for Northern Ireland. But so place management has changed a lot in that sense, because it's evolved into a much more formalised thing. Although what intrigues me is, first of all, how places have changed, because the past 10 or 15 years have been kind of unprecedented in terms of economic shifts, but also how place management isn't consistently deployed. So you can get a place that has no discernible form of place management today, whereas it may have had something 15 years ago, or conversely, you get maybe a place smaller than that, which has got a business improvement district, which is the most sophisticated form of place management. So this inconsistency of the deployment of place management kind of intrigues me, and to a certain extent baffles me.
Yeah, because that creates challenges in so many areas, doesn't it? And one of the challenges you mentioned for places is like those external factors, and that are not specifically place topics, but do impact place. Have you seen? What would you say? What those key external factors are that impact place? Retail shifts, online culture, climate change, transport,
sure,
COVID, and all those aspects. What were those kind of external factors as well as the management factors that have an impact?
Okay, so there's a perfect storm right now of factors. Now, one thing to emphasise, and I believe this fundamentally, is that places, towns and cities have existed for thousands of years. I think it's something like 9,000 years ago. You can trace back the origins of towns and cities within the globe. Now, just if you take the UK, 400 or 500 years ago, places, even some of our major cities, were obviously much smaller, but were based on essentially marketplaces, trading livestock and goods. Now, the reason I make that point about the past is that some people right now, as a result of this perfect storm, which I'll talk about in a moment, believe that places are somehow dying and will not exist. Now, my fundamental belief is that they will continue to exist for relatively eternity, as long as there are humans on the planet, because places are social hubs, and humans, even with the advances of technology, like to be within hubs and to socialise. They're always drawn to hubs. Now, the recent kind of perfect storm over the past I'd say 30 years, way pre-COVID, was the rise of, first of all, out-of-town retail, which still is a factor on town and city centres. The changing and the increasing tendency towards online shopping, so online retail. Then, of course, we've had latterly COVID, which was an enormous economic shock. But beyond COVID, and the economic shocks were already there, our national and global economy is much more volatile and changing much more rapidly. So places, and certainly the conventional use of places, i.e. retail predominantly and a degree of experiential, have undergone enormous change and are enormously challenging. But I believe it's a reset rather than a kind of terminal decline.
I love the fact you mentioned there around the history of the place. And I guess you can look back into empires. You can look back into, I'm no historian in that sense, but you can look into back to civilizations, how civilizations have moved around the globe, and how they've been created, how they've been conquered and taken over and adapted and changed. And like you said, place is never going to die, but place will develop in that sense.
Sure.
And I guess success, to use a word, is ambiguous to a degree, I guess. But what would you say is a matter of success within a place at the moment? What does success look like in the generation of 2025?
To me, and I'm going to focus this through the lens of place management, success looks like an active scheme of place management. And let me qualify what I mean by that. To me, you might walk into a given place which looks and feels splendid, or which looks and feels awful. And I'll tell you what I mean by looks and feels. But if both of them have either the beginnings of or an established and active place management scheme, then they have the tools to address their issues. Now, my view, and this is probably shared with many people of place, is that you can go to any given place and there's a combination of several factors. One of them is that it looks and feels well maintained, and that's an increasing challenge for places. Another one is that it looks and feels vibrant, so it's got a sort of range of retail units and entertainment units that are relatively occupied, so it's got very few vacant units, and it doesn't feel as though, whoa, this is a bit of a ghost town. So that's another measure of place. And vibrancy obviously also covers how many people are there. Has it got a bustle? Has it got a feeling of kind of entertainment about it? Is there a sense of theatre? Are there street performers? Is there a sense of ambience? Now, whether you've got the best or one of the worst place in terms of those measures, as long as you have an active and established place management scheme, my fundamental belief is that you're on the journey to improving whatever circumstances you face, or in some places to provide the icing on the cake. So to me,
I like that term. I like that term, active.
Yeah, to me, success is a place that has mobilized its people, its stakeholders, some people might call them, towards improvements. And again, one of the things that I get baffled by and really frustrated by is if I walk into a place and I think, blimey, there's things which really need to be done here. And some of them are relatively simple, quick wins. And I see no evidence of place management. And I just think you're missing a trick, because place management doesn't have to be a business improvement district. It can be any form of informal partnership. And it just needs to bring people together to begin a journey of improvement. And places that don't have that, I just think are hugely complacent and need to be supported to get to where they need to be.
100%. I think there's lots of things to pick up on there. And the experience, the active, I like that term that you've used, active places. On that theme, maybe an aspect of active is kind of like, I guess, what we look at with wayfinding is like navigation around a place, being able to find places within that environment. And picking up on your point about working with regions or districts or areas or counties or larger conglomerates rather than just a town or a city. in that sense. Have you come across any towns where they've looked at where navigation has been done effectively that increases that sense of active throughout the place?
Sure. So what I'll say around navigation, and you know this far better than I do, but it begins with your approach to the place. So whether you're travelling by car or by train or by other means, the whole entrance experience, and let's say you're travelling by train, when you get off at the railway station, your experience starts in terms of appearance and wayfinding. It's the
Definitely.
same as if you get out of your car in a car park. And so for me, the best places in terms of navigation are those which on the way in, and certainly from a motorist perspective, for those people who are using cars, it's well signposted. It's relatively easy to navigate, to park somewhere relatively close. The same with railway stations. Some railway stations are really central. Some are quite peripheral and can be quite a walk into the centre. Now, that whole experience starts at the point where you become a pedestrian and you're essentially navigating that place. And it's very rare to find a place that gets it totally right, both in terms of the entrance, the initial, let's say, impression, the kind of wow factor, and then being able to easily navigate a place that you don't know as a pedestrian. And, you'll know this, but you can talk at length around various forms of wayfinding, which don't have to be the conventional signage, although quite often they are, but can be things around kind of urban design. I mean, for me, one of the worst aspects of a town is where it's not intuitively clear where the centre is, because there's buildings blocking you, or there's kind of obstacles blocking you.
And viewing angles.
Yes, lines of sight, and also kind of navigational tools around wayfinding of kind of pedestrian routes. And there's ways you can decorate them, or floor graphics, and there's all sorts of tricks which you'll know a lot about. But it's rare to find a town that does it all very well, and I think that's a real opportunity missed.
Definitely. So I kind of want to. There's a couple of aspects I think is really important there. And we talked about different structures of place. We talked about the history of place. But as we come to a place, and I want to make sure that on this each and every episode we have some nuggets that we can take away as custodians of places. We might not own them, but we might be a custodian of a place. But how do we then? You said the interventions, the active places. How do we then go and strategically curate or direct or impact our towns, our retail areas, our mixed use spaces? Where do we start? What do we, and as you mentioned, that's what I always love to say in Wayfinding. It doesn't have to be a multi-million-pound intervention. It doesn't have to be a grand plan of magnitude in that sense. It could be putting in more seating, lighting, having the correct information updated on your website. Those are the aspects that are really quick wins in that sense. But where do we start when we are brought into a struggling town or central commercial area? What would be the focus to have the biggest impact?
Okay, so the first point to make is it's really difficult, it's very complex, and it can be very expensive. So that's the first point I'd make. But, and there is an enormous but here, because when a place has challenges, what shouldn't be the case is that people are put off what they see as big, complex, kind of, challenging problems. They shouldn't be put off doing anything, because you're absolutely right. Depending on the resource available, you can tailor interventions depending on the resource. Now, when you say kind of where do you start with the low-hanging fruit, and it's important to understand that even what might be perceived as some of the best places, really popular tourist destinations that you think they're absolutely perfect, they've got no problems, we'd love to be that place, they can also have fundamental issues that can be addressed very quickly, because whilst they might be looking at the icing on the cake, as I described it, previously. Sometimes there's complacency around some of the basics, because every town, it's a little bit like the painting the fourth bridge. When an intervention is done, then quite often people quite rightly focus on the next task at hand. And it might be that the very basic wayfinding hasn't been looked at in a place for 20 years or more. And in that time, the place may have changed. And you've probably seen many examples of this, but where you go into a town and they have, for example, directional maps, and you look and it's kind of a different town. There's a shopping centre where there wasn't one before.
Moved on.
Yeah, absolutely. Things change. So it's, I guess, on one hand, I'm saying it's a relatively thankless, never-ending task, which some people think, well, why would you even do it then? But there are always, throughout any place intervention, and certainly with regard to wayfinding, things that you can review, sort of go back to basics and improve on. And you might do this yourself, but what I often encourage my clients to do is to come and have a site visit through the eyes of a visitor. And I'll take them on the journey that I had as a visitor. And, it's interesting to kind of try to refocus people that just become blind to some of the, quick wins they could be enacting.
Definitely. And that having an outside perspective, I think, is an extremely valuable thing. And an outside perspective with that professional lens added to the view in that sense as well. So if we're talking about kind of those areas where we might start a struggling town centre or commercial place, if a town centre was a meal, and what ingredients would we need to start to bring together into that? I don't know why I thought of that example, but that cake, that meal. what would be the ingredients of a well curated place?
The principle of this is simple. Now, I've explained to you that place management is a practice which involves bringing people together, predominantly businesses. So the art to this, and this is where people that understand place management have kind of ability to do this, but arguably anybody can do it, because it's certainly not rocket science, but is to take your analogy of a meal, you ask the local people, well, what do you like to eat? Because there's no purpose in me turning up with a coconut and they say, oh, I'm sorry, we like bread. Now, we're really forcing your analogy now, but the simple principle is to each place is unique and each place has unique challenges. And if you're going to mobilise people around improvements, it has to reflect what they see as the priority improvements, not what I see, although I'm able to advise and to guide on that, but it's to take their feedback. So what we'll do is we will talk to and gain data from through conversations, surveys, sometimes focus groups, with as many businesses and stakeholders as possible to say, okay, this is what you're telling us, and based on our experience, we think that the achievable interventions around your key issues are X, Y, and Z. And of course, we flex that according with the budget that may be available.
Yeah, I love that. Love that aspect of data and insights as well. If the people is really important. And I love the fact of, like, as we said at the head of the conversation, it's about telling the story of a place. I think that's really important. But focusing on that around people's experience historically or things they want to bring to their place to take it to the next level, I think it's really important. How important is it to have a long-term vision for a place? Because I appreciate that sometimes we come up with a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, a local authority comes up with a master plan. How important is it to have that long-term vision? How does that actually impact, and how do we make it meaningful, not theoretical?
Sure, that's a really good question, because one thing that I've noticed in a very pronounced way, and it's the more traditional way of going about this, but is, as you've alluded to, some places have gleaming visions or master plans or all manner of long-term strategies, which have cost them a great deal of money, which arguably may not have involved as much or indeed any bottom-up feedback, i.e. feedback from the people in the place, are relatively templated and are kind of fed down from the top. Now, in my experience, they tend to be of limited benefit and become very dated and are therefore of limited use. Now, to answer your question with a simple one-word answer, how important is it to have a long-term plan or a vision? Very. It's very important. But for me, it's around doing that correctly. And what, for me, it should have is lots and lots of bottom-up feedback, feedback from the community, from businesses, from all sorts of local people to gain engagement and agreement to coalesce people around the vision. But it should also have very tactical 1, 3, 5-year plans within it. So not just to embody this huge strategy, which is arguably going to become dated, certainly with the pace of change around towns and cities at the moment. So the conventional, traditional documents and strategies, I believe, are of limited use. And there is a slight gap in the market around tactical, action-led, action-driven, annually reviewed plans, which then build the steps towards longer-term strategies, but those which can flex and evolve.
I think that's really important. We might pick that up at the end of this particular episode in that sense of how you're working currently to be able to make that possible for places. So I want to bring this all together as we've developed the conversation, really engaging, and really loved the thoughts and the probing thinking that we've been able to have together in this episode. But how I want to speak about how we can help connect emotionally and practically to a place and make every part of a place discoverable. We talked about the uniqueness of not teleporting an idea in from one place and it's automatically going to work in yours, or the perceived perception that a town or a city has it perfect and doesn't have their own unique challenges. So what do we mean when we say that a place needs to tell its own story, needs to be unique? What's it telling it? What's it going to bring out? Who's it going to communicate that to? How would we look for a place to start telling their own unique story?
Sure. I mean, that's another kind of great question. What I love about places, one of the things I love about places is the social history, history of the story. So there are many stories about place, and the best places are those which celebrate them and make them clear and evident. So, for example, what I love in a place is public art, which might celebrate the past or has a resonance with that place. I love things that denote the place. So, for example, there might be a geological or a historical feature that has been preserved and is part of the place. It hasn't just been concreted over. The place has taken time to celebrate its history. The whole story is a really interesting subject in itself because people interact with places in a range of ways and have a lot of emotional connection about a place. And there's lots and lots and lots of interesting sort of both academic and practical kind of information and research on things like that. And for me, again, the most successful places are those which have a strong sense of community and celebrate it, because the whole notion of celebration is that in the past, the approach from some places was that the decision makers acted in a very prim and proper manner and, would design and curate places to be very formal and kind of in the image that they want to see. But people shape places, and what is happening more often in our town and city centres are more experiential places. So you see things like children's play areas within a town or city centre, which you'd never have seen before because they were much more formalised. And so this notion of involving the community, who, let's be honest, it's their place. It's not,
100%.
nobody owns that place. There's a sense of joint ownership and curating it around and celebrating that interaction with people. And the best places, you feel a sense of pride in the place because there's things which resonate. They're interesting. You stop and you read things because they might be interesting, whereas some places just won't even show off their strengths. And I think that's an opportunity missed.
Definitely. And there's that blend, isn't there, between telling the story. I think that picks up a little bit on that history aspect. A place has been created for a generation of that era. And if you go back into kind of early English history in that sense, or recent Middle history, like Victorian times, they're more of a formalized culture, more of a whatever it was in that sense. And that fitted for that era. But for the generation that we find ourselves in the 2000s, 2020s, etc., those places need to move with that generational shift and need.
Sure.
And I like how we mentioned kind of other interventions to make the place tell the story: signage, murals, installations, events, etc. But
Sure.
how maybe do we strike a balance between creative placemakers, so public art, sculpture, and then using, we mentioned that's a key aspect of wayfinding, but then that blend between the clarity of navigation.
Sure.
Because often we see from a wayfinding perspective, people come up with really super cool illustrative maps, just as one example. And they start to tell the culture. They start to give you a bit of a background of the place, the story, etc. But then they lose a little bit of the sense of the clarity of compliance with dementia friendliness and legibility, etc. Have you seen a balance struck there at all?
I think it's very hit and miss, if I'm brutally honest, as many towns can be with regard to some things. What I like, and I love to see this within a town, is I like to see a trail. Now, I like to see a trail for several reasons. One of them, as a kind of hard-nosed former practitioner, you want to drive people from high to lower areas of footfall to satisfy the businesses that are within those lower areas of footfall. So you want to balance footfall across your town. So there's a very practical reason for a trail, be it a heritage trail or a food and drink trail or a sculpture trail or whatever it may be. So there's that aspect. But also a trail celebrates an aspect of a place. And, even these temporary interventions that people like Wild in Art do around, an installation of zebras or, sort of bears or whatever it may be in a town or a city, even temporarily creation of a trail, I think is a really good thing. Now, one thing, and this is slightly off piece, but I can't resist saying it because it links to the previous comment you made around towns having evolved, even from kind of, recent UK middle history. What is awful to see sometimes is where a place, you might see a past photo of a beautiful architectural kind of vista, and now it's a 60s shopping centre because what the place did, it didn't retain enough of its historical architecture, because for me,
part of the story, isn't it? It's part of the tapestry.
It is part of the story, and you said, and quite rightly, you said every generation shapes the place subsequently. But I think we're custodians of that, and we should therefore celebrate the past as well as creating new things for the future. And we should never wholesale, which was, a bit of a thing in the 1960s in the UK, wholesale demolish places and create new structures. So I couldn't resist saying that. But your question around wayfinding, I think that there's lots of opportunity for places, not only around physical things like maps or totems or trails, physical features, but of course digital wayfinding and the 100%. Whole thing around AI and the way that things, images and stories and kind of information can be displayed digitally now. And I didn't mean AI, I meant VR. Sorry, I got confused then. But the whole notion of a VR image being displayed on your phone of something in the past. So I think that that's a real opportunity for places. And I think wayfinding is very often discounted, and it can provide something which serves as both art, both information, important information in terms of guiding people, but also is relatively simple and can be inexpensive to do.
Yeah, no, I love that as a tip. So we've had a super engaging conversation, so maybe it's time to kind of bring that all to a head in that sense and wrap that nicely, beautifully together. Would there be kind of one tip or one piece of advice you would like to leave with place custodians from your experience that you think focus on this, get this right, or something not to do? Something
Sure.
to avoid where you see people going down a rabbit warren and kind of wasting time or money or effort in a place that they don't necessarily need to focus on straight away.
Sure. So I'll take the not to do first then. So the not to do is around don't be complacent. And I've made the point already that anywhere without a form of place management, and certainly those who haven't even tried it, that is, to me, super complacent. So that's something to be avoided at all costs. I guess the thing to do, and it's, I appreciate it's easier said than done, but is to kind of keep the faith around the fact that, yes, curating and improving a place is a never-ending task.
Yeah.
But don't be deterred by that, and keep seeing the improvements that you're enacting in your place. And quite often, when people actually record and look back on the achievements that they've made in a place, they're actually really surprised. So I guess my tip would be to make sure that you record before and afters of all of your interventions, if for no other reason than to give you the energy and the kind of the commitment to think, actually, I am making an ongoing difference here. And I use the term I as in the royal I, and that's because a place requires intervention of many people.
100%. Love that as a takeaway. It could be befores, afters. Typically, we think about photos. It could be testimonials. It could be data. It could be a whole host of ways that we record before and after. And love that as a takeaway tip.
Sure.
So I said we'd mention it in that sense, and you've mentioned it a little bit around how we help people create review when we talk about the kind of the master plans, the 5-year, 10-year visions. You've started recently something called the Place Coalition.
Sure.
So maybe if people want to know a little bit more about Chris, a little bit more about that, can you give us a bit of a, where do we find about Chris? What is the Place Coalition? Where do we find out a little bit more about that? If people want to kind of continue the conversation that they've heard us had on this particular episode.
Great. So, well, I run a company, Heartflood, and as I say, we've been established for just over 10 years, and we have a specialist focus around place management, around business improvement districts, and, you know, improving town and city centres. Now, I've been in the industry long enough, and I know you have as well, Jonathan, to appreciate that there are other people equally experienced that may have different niche services to provide. So with the Place Coalition, what we've done is we've brought together people that know and trust each other, that have proven pedigree and history within the place industry. So we all trust to be able to refer one another to our clients, because we know that the moment we refer somebody who's a bit questionable to one of our clients reflects badly on us. So we know and trust each other's ability, professionalism, and basically, you know, a track record. But we cover a range of, therefore, interventions. So a place can either talk to me about one aspect of what the Place Coalition do, or one of my colleagues around other aspects. Now, just to list some of them, were relatively randomly: digital skills training, data insights, business cost reductions, town and city centre gift cards, evening economy specialisms, the database for business improvement districts. So there's lots and lots of niche services, but we can collaborate on any size of project within a place. So we can go into any place and deliver a series of solutions for the client. And quite often we will provide a certain degree of advice at no cost, because we're conscious that the industry, we're all members of it, and we love the industry, so we're happy to provide a certain degree of information free of charge and to propagate that for the good of the industry. So that's really the idea of the Place Coalition. It's a kind of group of suppliers that can mobilise towards any needs that a place may have.
Love it. We'll get the website address. We'll put it in the description of this episode.
Great,
so if you want to find out a little bit more about Chris and the work that he's involved with at Heartflood and the Place Coalition, feel free to look at the description of this episode, and you can find all of Chris's contact details in there. So yeah, super. Thanks very much for joining us on this episode. It's been a really insightful, educational, really cool takeaways that we can have there for our places and those that we are custodians of. So thanks for joining us today.
No problem. Thank you, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks very much for joining us on this episode of Navigate Now. We've had a fantastic conversation thanks to our guest on this episode, Chris. And I just want to invite you to join us in the conversation as we explore everything around people and places. So like, subscribe, and follow us so you can keep as part of this conversation. Thanks very much.